are different in that the tail membrane is not around the tail, the tail is free. And they've got big buffy ears. They're the only bat in Australia where the ears actually meet in the middle of the head. And they've got wrinkled mouth, looks rather like a mastiff, so they used to be called a mastiff bat, except they're not dogs, therefore they're not mastiffs, so they've got renamed free-tail bats. And they've got bloody big teeth, so if they bite it really, really hurts. But fortunately, they're extremely docile.
Thank you.
The only thing they really don't like, which I'm just about to do, is having their wings stretched out, just so you can see what their wings look like.
Yeah, go for it. You've got to get short.
So you can see it's a very long, narrow wing. These guys fly above the canopy, therefore they don't need to duck and weave to avoid trees because there's no trees up there.
Yeah.
They can just scream at their very low-pitched voice, and it bounces off quite big insects, things like grasshoppers and crickets, and they just go straight for them, as opposed to fluttering around branches and twigs and not getting spiked. They're quite different. And you can see why they're called a white striped freetail, because they have white stripes, one down each side. Come on, if you want that.
You want to see the white stripe? There we go. Now we're going to ask you to turn this way as well.
They don't like sitting for their portraits. It just means I'm holding
We started this back in 1992. Were people taking pictures on this level?
Yep, sure. There's one down each side. Every now and then we come across one that has unusual white markings, like a stripe right across the belly or flecking across its head or its back or whatever, all over the place. And then, of course, you can recognise the individual bat without marking it. There was a study done by a bunch of bat biologists about 20 years ago of the injury rate from being banded and the death rate from being banded. And a prohibition was put on banding any species where there was a history of more than 2% death rate, because bat biologists want to look after the welfare of bats. These ones had a death rate of 100%.
Oh.
You put a band on it, you're killing it. It's condemning to death, because they'd actually rip off their arms rather than put up with having this thing on it. And of course they would then die. So banding of these has been prohibited for 20 years. And if you want to mark individuals, they're big enough to be microchipped. So most of our freetails are now microchipped. And Stephen's been doing that, which means you can mark individuals. You just have to run a wand across it and beep, and got a number. And we've actually had many retraps. So I need another bag for these. There's probably more in there. I suspect so. Yeah, I haven't looked to see how many there are, but I'll just go back. I just wanted to show you what the freetail looks like.
How does it go?
That's excellent.
So this is called a Gould's wattle bat.
Yeah.
And most of the bats we get in our boxes are of this species. And if you look closely where my thumb is, you can see its head fur is very dark and the back fur is much paler. It's a two-tone bat. It's the only bat in Australia that's a two-tone bat. So whenever you see a bat with dark head fur and pale back fur, it must be this species.
All right.
All the other bat species in Australia are the same colour all over. So this is quite easy to recognise. But also, you can recognise it from the ears. You can see it's got a very short face. It doesn't stick out a long way. You can recognise it also from the tail. The tail, you can see there's a membrane between the back feet and the tail is completely inside that membrane. It doesn't stick out like a dog's tail. It can't wag its tail at all, because the tail is completely inside this membrane, and it stretches it out like a bird's feathers and uses it as a rudder for steering, for turning corners.
All right.
Yes, they're very manoeuvrable. And you can see its belly fur is also quite pale. And it's got a cute little tongue that's poking its tongue out at you, telling you what it thinks of you.
We are naughty, yeah? What you are doing with me? Leave me alone.
And you can see they've got very, very sharp little teeth. They've got very sharp little teeth for chewing insects. They eat flies and beetles and moths. That's their dinner. So they're not interested in biting people at all. They're interested in biting flies and beetles and moths. That's what they eat.
For free. They don't have to work hard like me.
Okay. They give birth to live young. They breastfeed, just like you did when you had little children, because they're mammals just like us. Birthing time is November. The childhood of a bat is 2 months. So all the baby bats are now grown up. They were born in November, now they're fully grown up. Very short childhood. We have a very long childhood, they have a very short childhood, just like you have. And at the other end, as you can see, it's got little toes. See little toes there? Got 5 little toes. And its toes are tiny and its fingers are huge. because it uses those fingers to fly.
Yeah.
And you can see there's veins, there's blood supply in the wings because it's living tissue. So if you cut it, it hurts. It's not the same as you cutting your hair or your fingernails, which is just dead tissue. It's living tissue. It has to stay healthy. This one is a girl. Boys have penises, girls don't. You know about that? Big enough to know about that?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So it's a girl. They get pregnant. The mating season is about 2 months' time in April. They get pregnant about August, so they actually store the sperm for about 4 months. And the pregnancy lasts about 2 months. They give birth in October, November. And they breastfeed, just like we do. They're mammals, just like us. And the babies are weaned when they're about 2 months old. They would have been weaned last month. So they're very short childhood. And then they live for about 10 years. We have banded all these little fellows. So each one has got a number, so we can tell when we caught her and how many times we've caught her.
So obviously
and we can follow her pregnancies and her breastfeeding and whatever for her whole life. And we can then answer the question, if we follow her till she dies, how many children did she have? Did she have children every year or every second year or every third year? Most humans have children every 3 years apart. These guys, so far as we know, have children every year. And this particular species, unlike most other bats, has twins. So they always give birth to two.
No,
we have no idea. I could look up my records, and if we banded her when she was a juvenile, maybe 2 years ago, we can say, yep, she's 2 years old. But without reading the number and looking up my records, I can't tell you. And you can ask her, but she won't talk to you.
And I was asking, is there any...
Sorry?
All these have been done?
Yes, I've just got these to go. It should take me about half an hour.
How many have we got left?
I'll do this now.
This is a test of strength. 3 kilograms of bats. Very simple. We stand in a perfectly straight line. I'm a very good judge of perfectly straight lines.
Like he is?
Oh, like this?
Yeah.
The bats will probably fly off that way. They might not, but they usually do. Every now and then, you'll find a bat will just flop on the ground. If you all rush in and try to pick it up, we'll end up with one squished dead bat. So don't. Leave me to do it. I'll pick up any bats that flop on the ground. The bats, when they first leave your hand, will not be at flying speed. And so they will dip towards the ground. And they'll pick up within a couple of metres and head up. So you don't hold them down here because they'll hit the ground. You hold them as high as you can.
Yes. Up high!
Complete, utmost stretch of your hand. And you slowly turn the bag inside out. Just push the bottom up by rolling it down and turning it inside out. Push the bottom up very, very slowly because they're very small, fragile animals. If you do it really quickly, you'll break their wings. And they can't fly and they're dead. So do it really, really slowly. They'll probably come out bum first because that's the way bats live. And they'll eventually liberate their wings and they'll stretch their wings and fly off. The Gould wattle bats will probably be gone in half a second.
Yes.
The Vespertilus will probably be gone very soon after, but they're smaller and they may have started going torpid. It might take a little while to warm up. The freetail will sit there for 10 minutes before it makes up its mind.
Who's doing the freetail?
It's just a test of whether you can hold your arm up that long.
That's okay, I don't mind.
It certainly likes you, Robert.
I think it's just feeling a bit cold.
It's a little bit cool.
They go torpid at will. Usually takes them about 10 minutes to do so. And sometimes I've just sat something on my shoulder for 10 minutes and it gets warmed up and eventually flies off.
So Robert, if they do end up on the ground, are they able to get up off the ground ever? Or?
No, they'll crawl to the nearest tree and climb that and then fly off. So if they're nowhere near a tree, they've got a problem.
I contemplated taking this one out with my hand until I saw what I was presented with. Oh, gee.
I'm sorry.
I put my hand in the other The big one. A real bag of bats.
No, I'm just
Oh.
a person, so
Oh, it is for Rob Ronnie.